If you've never seen a grown man in pajama pants, bunny slippers, and a bathrobe standing on a tractor yelling "Return to sender," while hauling a 1,000-pound concrete block, then let me tell you, you haven't truly lived. And if that man happens to be me? Well, buckle up, because this war with the HOA didn't just start with a feud, it started with sabotage. The morning it all kicked off felt ordinary. Birds chirping, coffee brewing, my old dog Duke barking at squirrels like it was a paid position. I shuffled out the door with a cup of joe in hand, already thinking about how I might finally fix the rattling front gate, when I stopped dead in my tracks. My driveway was gone. Not literally, but effectively. 3 massive concrete barriers now sat across it like the world's worst welcome mat. Big, ugly, gray monstrosities that looked like they belonged on a military base, not on a rural property in Timber Ridge. At first, I thought there'd been a mix-up, some roadwork or emergency detour. But no, there was a smug little paper taped to one of them. A violation notice from the HOA, signed in curly, self-important handwriting by none other than Geraldine Munsley, aka Karen of the cul-de-sac, aka HOA president, aka she who must be obeyed. The violation stated I had committed aesthetic misconduct by parking my vintage 1958 Farmall tractor too close to the road. Too close, in this case, meant 50 feet from it, partially visible behind a row of bushes and a tree I personally planted 15 years ago. Never mind that I've lived here longer than the HOA has existed. Never mind that the tractor is fully operational and probably more valuable than half the houses in the neighborhood. Karen's paper declared it a visual blight, and so, without warning, the HOA had installed a wall to encourage compliance. I stood there, stunned, sipping lukewarm coffee as the absurdity sank in. This wasn't just petty, it was personal. Karen and I have had run-ins before, ever since I refused to attend her monthly mandatory community aesthetic seminars, and once declined to donate to her husband's utterly pointless campaign for local pond preservation awareness. It was no secret she saw me as an eyesore in her curated community of pastel-painted flower beds and overpriced lawn ornaments. When I drove my truck around the block to get out and back in through my neighbor's yard, I saw her. Standing at the edge of her pristine driveway, arms crossed, smiling like a fox in a chicken coop. She even gave me a little wave. That wave broke something in me. Not anger, not just yet. No, what I felt was a mix of disbelief and a deep itch for justice. Not the kind you get from lawyers or HOA appeal boards. The slow, patient, hands-dirty kind. The kind you plan on the porch with a friend over beer and barbecue. That night, I called up Jeb. He's an old friend from my high school days, a dairy farmer with a mind for mischief and a love for bending rules just enough to make them snap. After I laid out the situation, he didn't laugh, he grinned. "You got a tractor, Tommy," he said. "And concrete don't float." We stayed up until 1 a.m. cooking up a plan. Not just for petty payback, but for a spectacle. A public display that wouldn't just make Karen sweat, it would unravel the HOA's self-righteous control over the neighborhood. The first step? Deliver the barriers back to their rightful owners. Not with a moving crew, not with an apology, but with the very vehicle they tried to banish. The next morning, I pulled out the Farmall, gave her a tune-up, greased the chain, checked the tires. I even dusted her hood, because if she was going to be the star of the show, she had to look good doing it. As I worked, neighbors stopped by. Some under the guise of walking dogs, some actually walking dogs. A few asked quietly what I was planning. I just said, returning something that don't belong to me. That evening, just after sunset, I wrapped a tow chain around one of the blocks. The concrete scraped and groaned, but that old tractor didn't flinch. I took the long route, circling the block like a parade float from hell. It wasn't fast, but it was loud and it was deliberate. As I rumbled down the main neighborhood road, porch lights flicked on. People watched from behind curtains. Karen's lights were already out, but that would change soon. I reached the HOA office around 9 p.m. It's a tiny converted dentist's office nestled between a yoga studio and a frozen yogurt shop. I backed the tractor up, unhooked the chain, and gently shoved the concrete block right up against the glass doors. Not enough to break them, just enough that no one was getting in or out without serious effort. Then I taped a little note to the side. Property returned. Next time, send a receipt. The next morning, I waited. Around 7:30 a.m., I got a text from Jeb. Turn on Channel 6. I did. And there she was. Karen, in a full pantsuit and pearls, arguing with a local news crew outside the blocked office. "This is harassment," she barked, "and it's completely illegal." The reporter smiled. So were the barriers placed in front of Mr. Thomas's home without permit, according to county records. Karen blinked, visibly short-circuiting. That's when I knew the battle had begun, and I wasn't just going to win. I was going to dismantle their castle, brick by brick, with a tractor and a smile. Because if they wanted a fight, they should have thought twice before messing with a man whose hobbies included stubbornness, engine grease, and creative revenge. Karen thought the concrete stunt would be the end of it. One humiliating news clip, one viral video, and she probably assumed I'd ride off into the sunset, satisfied with my single act of tractor-powered justice. But that was just the opening move. What she didn't know, and what she sorely underestimated, was just how stubborn a retired man with a grudge and too much free time could be. Because the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about my tractor. This was about every neighbor she'd steamrolled, every unnecessary fine, every ridiculous HOA code she made up just to tighten her grip. This wasn't going to be a one-and-done revenge. This was going to be a slow-motion demolition of her little empire. Jeb came over the next morning with a backpack full of donuts and blueprints. Not actual architectural blueprints. He'd printed out the layout of the HOA office building from the county assessor's website. It was a squat little structure, just 2 rooms and a tiny bathroom, wedged between a nail salon and a vape shop that was somehow always closed. We sat on my porch, coffee steaming in mismatched mugs, going over every angle. There were no back doors, only 2 windows, and a single front entrance, which was where I'd parked the first concrete gift. The best part? No cameras. Karen had always been obsessed with installing surveillance in the neighborhood, but apparently she'd skipped protecting her own HQ. Classic. By the end of breakfast, we drafted what Jeb called Operation Return to Sender, Phase 2. The idea was simple. I would deliver each remaining concrete block, one by one, straight to the HOA office. Not in a rush. Not with any trace of malice. No, the beauty of it was in the patience. Like a cat bringing home birds to its owner, except the birds weighed 1,000 pounds and came with city-grade rebar. Slowly. Publicly. With a smile on my face. That afternoon, I prepped the second block. Cleaned it off, wrapped it in a red ribbon I'd saved from Christmas, and even printed a fake label that read, to HOA Management, from Concerned Resident. Jeb and I laughed so hard over that one we nearly dropped the chain. The next delivery was scheduled for Sunday morning, just before their usual HOA meeting. They liked to meet early, around 8 a.m., so they could still make it to church and act like they weren't plotting neighborhood domination. At precisely 7:30 a.m., I rolled down the street with the second block chained to the back of the Farmel, engine rumbling like a bear clearing its throat. This time, I wore a bow tie and suspenders, just to give it a festive feel. A few neighbors waved. One man across the street actually saluted. I nodded back, solemn as a judge. As I reached the HOA office, I swung the tractor around and backed in slowly, the reverse beeping I'd installed just for the occasion echoing off the storefront. I positioned the block dead center in front of the door, then placed a tiny garden gnome on top, holding a plastic sign that read, "Enjoy." By the time Karen arrived, she had to climb out of her SUV and walk around the side of the building to even reach the entrance, only to find it sealed tighter than a vault. I stayed parked across the street, sipping from a thermos. She spotted me and stormed over, her heels clicking like gunfire on the pavement. "This is harassment," she hissed. "You think you're clever? You're going to jail for this." I smiled, tipped my hat, and said, "Just returning property that was improperly delivered. You can thank me later." That seemed to send her into a sputtering rage. She stormed back to her car, pulled out her phone, and spent the next 15 minutes pacing and shouting into it. I didn't hear all of it, but the words tow truck, lawyer, and media spin popped up more than once. Meanwhile, HOA board members began showing up one by one, looking more bewildered than outraged. I could see some of them actually smirking. It turns out not everyone on her board agreed with the tactics she was using, but they'd been too scared or lazy to push back. The tow truck never showed. Apparently, the driver took one look at the location, realized the block was on private commercial property, and bailed. Jeb confirmed later that the local tow company had no interest in being dragged into HOA drama after seeing the first incident on TV. That meant the block stayed where it was, and the HOA had to cancel their meeting due to obstruction issues, which someone from the board anonymously posted about in the neighborhood group chat. It was followed by a crying laughing emoji and the words, "Should have just asked the guy to move his tractor." Karen doubled down the next day. A crew of men arrived at my property with buckets of construction adhesive and tried to glue a second row of concrete blocks into place. This time, I called the sheriff, but they moved fast. By the time law enforcement arrived, the workers were gone and the blocks were set. I couldn't tow them now without damaging the driveway. But Karen had overplayed her hand. She'd escalated things publicly, and now everyone was watching, including people she didn't want to attract, county inspectors, local journalists, and neighbors who were suddenly coming out of the woodwork with their own horror stories. Fines for wind chimes, threats over flower bed colors, ridiculous restrictions on Halloween decorations. It was as if the floodgates had opened. That night, Jeb and I rigged up the wildlife cameras I'd hidden inside decorative birdhouses around the property. Just in time, too, because sometime after midnight, a shadowy figure crept across the lawn and tried to loosen my mailbox post with a crowbar. The footage was grainy, but even under the hoodie and face mask, the distinct limp and stubby fingers gave Karen's husband away. The next morning, I printed the footage and mailed it straight to the county sheriff's department. The next block delivery was already planned. This one would come with a little extra flair, a homemade sign reading, "Your Move," painted in bright yellow across the top. As the tractor warmed up and the chain clinked into place, I couldn't help but feel something that surprised me: excitement. For the first time in years, I wasn't just reacting to the HOA's nonsense. I was taking back control, one concrete block at a time. And I had a feeling Karen was starting to realize this wasn't going to end until I decided it was over. The next few days felt like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Everyone in the neighborhood was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The HOA board, now deeply split, barely held it together in public. Some members had gone radio silent, clearly not wanting to be dragged down with Karen as she scrambled to maintain control. Meanwhile, Karen herself was becoming increasingly erratic. She stopped waving at neighbors, started driving faster than usual, and at one point was spotted yelling into a Bluetooth headset while storming through the local hardware store. Whatever she was planning, I could feel it brewing. The third block sat like a sleeping bear at the end of my driveway, untouched, a quiet promise of escalation. I hadn't moved it yet because I was waiting for the right moment. I wanted it to land with impact, not just theatrically but legally. Jeb had been digging through county records and found a series of inconsistencies in how the HOA had been operating. Turns out they never properly updated their bylaws when Karen took over. Several of the latest fines and actions she'd authorized didn't meet the updated municipal guidelines, which meant that a whole slew of her recent decisions, mine included, were invalid on paper. It was exactly the leverage we needed. But just when we thought we were gaining ground, Karen played dirty. I came home one afternoon after picking up feed to find my mailbox smashed to bit. Not bent, not nudged, obliterated. The pole was cracked clean in half, and the box itself looked like someone had taken a sledgehammer to it. Worse yet, the cables for my exterior cameras had been neatly clipped, right at the base where they fed into the main hub. I checked the footage from the backup wildlife cameras, the ones hidden in the birdhouses, and sure enough, the same figure from before. Karen's husband, wearing the same hoodie and with the same unmistakable limp, was on the video. He even looked directly at one of the cameras at one point, probably thinking it was a bird feeder. I filed another police report, this time with clearer evidence. The sheriff's deputy didn't say much, but his eyebrows went up when I handed him the SD card. He'd been watching this HOA war unfold on the local news like the rest of the town, and I could tell part of him was enjoying the mess. He promised a formal warning would be issued and told me to stay out of direct confrontation. That night, under the orange glow of the porch light, I decided it was time. No more waiting. No more pacing. The third block was going to be the centerpiece of a spectacle. Jeb and I painted the top of it with bold yellow letters. Your move. Then we mounted an old mirror on one side, so when Karen looked at it, she'd see herself in the reflection. It was poetic. Petty? Maybe. But effective. I made the delivery the next morning, right as traffic from the elementary school started to pick up. Perfect timing. Kids waved as I drove by, parents slowed to watch. One guy even honked and gave a thumbs up. I parked the tractor diagonally in front of the HOA office, unchained the block, and carefully eased it into place. It was now the third barrier clogging their entrance, and it was beautiful. Karen arrived 15 minutes later and completely lost it. I mean red-faced, vein-popping, finger-jabbing fury. She didn't even try to hide it this time. She marched up to the block and screamed at it like it might listen. When that failed, she turned on me, yelling about harassment, civil suits, and federal obstruction laws. I didn't say a word. Just smiled and sipped my coffee from the tractor seat. That's when Jeb showed up, wearing a button-up shirt and holding a manila envelope. He strolled over casually, handed her the envelope, and said, "Official notice. You're in violation of 3 county ordinances, and this whole operation you're running? Might want to read up on Chapter 16, subsection C." She tore the envelope open with shaky fingers and scanned the first page. Her face turned ghost white. Jeb had filed a formal cease and desist, backed by documented evidence of procedural failures and overreach. The enclosed documents included statements from multiple neighbors, old meeting minutes, and even legal commentary from a former HOA attorney who now worked freelance in our county. Karen stumbled back, muttering something under her breath. The local news van that had been tailing our little war for the last few weeks suddenly pulled up. A young reporter named Lindsay hopped out with a cameraman in tow. "Perfect timing," she said with a wink. "Care to comment, Karen?" Karen tried to dodge them, but Lindsay had developed a reputation for getting footage whether people liked it or not. Microphone in her face, Karen finally snapped. "This is character assassination. This man is a menace. He's using heavy machinery to terrorize me." Lindsay blinked. "You mean the tractor?" "Yes. That monstrous red thing. He's weaponizing agriculture." You could hear the cameraman chuckling behind the lens. Karen stormed off, yelling into her phone again, while the board members trickled into the parking lot looking like kids forced to attend detention. One of them, Greg, a guy who always kept quiet in meetings, walked over to me and mumbled, "For the record, I voted against the concrete." Then he scurried off like he'd confessed a crime. Later that afternoon, I found a note on my porch. No envelope, just a folded sheet of printer paper that read, "This isn't over. You're going to regret this. Consider this a warning." It was typed, unsigned, and poorly spell-checked. I handed it over to the sheriff's office along with the mailbox footage. Between the two, they agreed to place Karen's husband under official investigation for property damage and intimidation. Still, something told me Karen wasn't done. People like her never go down quietly. They don't apologize, don't reflect, don't back off until something bigger than their pride forces them to. But that was fine by me. Because I had one more block, one more delivery, and a finale planned that would leave her legacy buried in the very concrete she tried to bury me with. And when it landed, everyone would see it coming. Especially Karen. It was funny how quiet the neighborhood had become. Not peaceful quiet, but the kind where every curtain seems just slightly pulled back and everyone walks their dogs a little slower, just in case something's about to happen. Karen hadn't been seen in 2 days, and for someone who made a hobby out of monitoring everyone's trash bins and mailbox flags, that was practically a disappearance. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said she was meeting with lawyers, others claimed she'd gone to stay with her sister in Florida to cool down. Jeb and I didn't care where she went. What mattered was that the final delivery was coming, and we were going to make it count. I had one last block left. The biggest, roughest one of the bunch, cracked down one side, covered in a few streaks of paint from the HOA's rushed installation crew. It was ugly, stubborn, and strangely perfect. If ever a concrete block could represent Karen's regime, this was the one. And I wasn't just going to drop it in front of their office. No, I had something special in mind. I was going to take it right into the belly of the beast, into the HOA meeting room itself. You'd think that sort of thing would require breaking and entering. But here's the thing, with everything going public, Karen had tried to regain control by making the next HOA meeting open to all residents. A last-ditch PR move, probably meant to show that she wasn't afraid of criticism. The meeting was to be held in the same office space as always. Public notice. Same time, same place. Except this time, there were going to be witnesses. And I was going to be one of them. The night before, Jeb and I got to work. We sanded the top of the final block until it was smooth, then painted a bright, obnoxious pink over the whole surface. On one side, I stenciled the words, "Final Notice," in white block letters. On the other side, I glued a laminated copy of Karen's original violation letter to me, the very first one that started this whole mess. We added a red bow for good measure and mounted it on a wheeled platform built from an old wagon base. I wasn't going to drive it in with the tractor, too risky, too many eyes. But I could roll it in with good old-fashioned manpower and a grin. When the morning of the meeting came, I dressed up like I was heading to church. Clean jeans, pressed flannel, polished boot. Jeb wore his best cowboy hat and carried a clipboard just for effect. We arrived 5 minutes before the meeting started, the concrete block in tow. It sat heavy and regal on its wheeled platform, looking more like a cursed monolith than a piece of construction material. People stopped talking as we rolled it through the lot. Phones came out. No one said a word to stop us. Most were too curious to intervene, and a few were clearly enjoying the show. Inside the HOA office, the room was already half full. Folding chairs in tight rows, a folding table up front with bottled water, nameplates, and that ridiculous faux gold gavel Karen loved to slam when she called meetings to order. She hadn't arrived yet. Perfect. We parked the block right in front of the table. Center stage. Then we sat, front row, arms folded like two proud dads at a school play. A few board members recognized us. Greg, the quiet one, offered a nervous wave. The others just looked away. Karen entered 5 minutes late, flanked by her husband and a woman in a pinstripe suit who looked exactly like the kind of lawyer who charges by the minute and smirks like it's part of the job. Karen stopped cold when she saw the block. Her jaw tightened, her cheeks flushed. For a second I thought she might faint. But instead, she powered forward and tried to pretend it wasn't there. She slammed the gavel, cleared her throat, and began. This meeting is now in session. I will remind all present that disruption or interference will not be tolerated, and legal counsel is present for any necessary enforcement. I raised my hand before she could finish her sentence. She sighed. What? I stood up slowly. Just wanted to point out that according to HOA Bylaw 3.2b, All items affecting the agenda must be submitted in writing 72 hours prior to the meeting. However, this particular item, I gestured to the block, has been part of ongoing business since the last 3 deliveries. So by my math, it qualifies. There were snorts of laughter around the room. Even the lawyer's lips twitched. Karen was losing her grip, and everyone could see it. She tried to recover by shifting the conversation to new business, attempting to push through a motion to clarify acceptable use of private vehicles and heavy equipment on residential properties. It was a thinly veiled jab, and it flopped. None of the board members would second the motion. Greg stood up and quietly read a statement he'd prepared, expressing concern about how decisions had been made without votes, how fines were issued inconsistently, and how he believed Karen had overstepped her authority. It wasn't dramatic or loud, but it was a dagger to the heart of her power. Then came the final blow. Jeb stood up, clipboard in hand, and read a legal notice from the county. It confirmed that the HOA was under formal investigation for multiple violations, including mismanagement of funds, improper notice on fines, and failure to adhere to updated municipal codes. The room fell dead silent. Karen's face turned to stone. The lawyer leaned over and whispered something in her ear. She nodded stiffly and announced that she would be stepping down as president, pending resolution of the investigation. People started clapping. It wasn't a cheer. It was slow, quiet, cathartic. Years of pent-up frustration released in the form of polite applause. Karen stood there, stiff and furious, eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. She grabbed her bag, turned on her heel, and stormed out without another word. Outside, the sun was high and hot. A few folks had gathered in the lot to watch her departure. Some waved. Some didn't. As she pulled out, the wheeled platform holding the final block sat in the parking space closest to the office, pink and proud. She didn't even look at it. Jeb leaned over and whispered, "That went better than I thought." I chuckled and said, "I think she finally got the message." And just like that, the power shifted. Not just from Karen to someone else, but from fear to laughter, from control to community. The block remained there for the rest of the day. By evening, someone had placed a tiny flag on top of it that read, "Long live the tractor." I didn't put it there, but I appreciated the sentiment. The days that followed were unlike anything Timber Ridge had seen before. For the first time in years, neighbors were chatting in driveways without glancing over their shoulders. Kids rode bikes past the HOA office without being told to keep off the grass. Wind chimes jingled freely from porches, and no one received a letter about them being distracting to the visual flow of the street. It was as if a thick fog had lifted, and under it, people remembered they were a community, not just a collection of people living under the same roofline. The concrete blocks remained for a while, almost like little monuments to resistance. The pink one with the "final notice" sign drew the most attention. Some neighbors took pictures with it. Others left little gifts, like a garden gnome with a hard hat or a cup of coffee resting perfectly on the flat surface. I didn't move them. I figured they earned their spot in local history. Karen, on the other hand, vanished. Not in the literal sense. Her house was still there, her husband's beat-up SUV still appeared in the driveway now and then, but she didn't show her face around the neighborhood anymore. Rumor had it that she'd taken an extended leave of absence from her real estate job and was recuperating somewhere with less confrontation. Others said she was working behind the scenes to mount some kind of legal retaliation, but nothing ever came of it. Probably because the investigation into her misuse of HOA funds and intimidation tactics had become very, very real. Between Greg's statement, the stack of resident complaints, and the footage I'd handed over of her husband tampering with my mailbox, the county had all it needed to step in. No lawsuits came my way. Just silence. Eventually, the HOA as we knew it dissolved. Officially, it was restructured. Unofficially, it was gutted and rebuilt from the ground up. A new committee formed, one with actual elections, term limits, and, shockingly, respect for residents' rights. Greg was appointed interim chair until the fall, and he asked me, more than once, to join the new board. I declined every time. Not because I didn't care, but because I'd already fought the fight I needed to. I didn't want a seat at the table. I just wanted to make sure the table didn't crush people underneath it. With the power vacuum gone, life finally started to feel like mine again. I repainted the old tractor, gave her a new seat, polished up the chrome, even mounted a small plaque on the side that read, HOA Express. Every time I rolled her out for a Sunday ride, someone would wave or give a thumbs up. One kid even asked if he could take a photo sitting on it, and I obliged. Jeb joked that we should start offering tractor tours and charge admission. I told him we might just break even if we sold commemorative cinder blocks. A month later, I held a barbecue. Not a protest, not a rally, just good food, cold drinks, and neighbors getting to know each other again. I set up long tables in the yard, covered in mismatched tablecloths and bowls of homemade potato salad. Folks brought pies, casseroles, coleslaw, and more desserts than we had room for. Someone even brought a karaoke machine, which ended in a very enthusiastic but deeply off-key rendition of Sweet Caroline from Jeb that we'll never let him live down. As the sun set and the fireflies came out, people started asking questions. Not about the HOA or Karen, but about me. About the tractor. About why I fought back the way I did. And all I could say was this: sometimes the only thing standing between you and a life of quiet misery is a bit of nerve and a reliable tow chain. A few weeks after that, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name written in careful cursive. I opened it on the porch with Duke lying by my feet. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No threats, no fines. Just a handwritten note. It said, "You made your point. I hope you're satisfied. I won't forget any of it." It wasn't signed, but I didn't need it to be. I folded the letter, walked inside, and dropped it straight into the trash. Satisfaction didn't come from winning. It came from knowing that I'd stood my ground, that I didn't let someone walk all over me just because they had a clipboard and a loud voice. Life found a new rhythm. The yard was finally mine again. I built a small wildflower garden where the last concrete block had been dumped, the one I never even had to move. Bees came. Then butterflies. Eventually, birds started visiting, and I mounted one of the birdhouse cameras nearby to keep an eye on them, just for fun. The mailbox got rebuilt. Thicker, taller, reinforced with a steel core, just in case anyone got any ideas. I didn't expect trouble, but I'd learned it's always better to be prepared. Jeb and I still met every week, usually over coffee or barbecue, depending on the day. Sometimes we talked about the HOA saga. Other times we didn't mention it at all. He had his own tales of fence disputes and chicken-related neighborhood wars, and I never got tired of hearing them. We'd become unlikely folk heroes, I guess. Two stubborn old men with a sense of humor and a deep dislike for being pushed around. But if that was our reputation, I was fine with it. I wasn't trying to change the world. I wasn't out to start a revolution. I just wanted to be left alone, to live my life without someone measuring my grass or telling me my tractor was an eyesore. Turns out, a lot of people wanted the same thing. All it took was someone to push back loud enough that the silence broke. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in streaks of orange and pink, I sat on the porch with Duke, watching the fireflies spark to life across the lawn. The tractor sat in the distance, glinting in the fading light, still and strong. And as I sipped my iced tea, I couldn't help but smile. Some folks build fences to keep the world out. Others build walls to control what's inside. Me? I move concrete. One block at a time,